Welcome back, or welcome to Hades, as this one is the collaboration between QKZ and Hawaii Bad Boy, HBB, known as Hades. On the cover of the box, you notice there's a couple booms and a pow, and I think that goes right along with the intention of this set. It is a bass head set that will most definitely boom, it will most definitely pow in your ear, shake your ears a little bit, and I think that is 100% the intention here, so do keep that in mind. You also notice the purple faceplate, which doesn't really get captured as well in a still picture as it does on video. But yeah, it's one of those kind of a, not reflective, but a light shifting style purple, kind of catches some shine and it changes as you gradually look at it from different angles. Slightly translucent, you can almost see through it to the business end, which is two dynamic drivers. So two 9mm dynamic drivers, kind of get a look at them there. You can see it on the side and on the side, but yep, two 9mm dynamic drivers. You also notice that the nozzle doesn't have that con or zero style extended lip, which was a little bit painful or uncomfortable for some people. I thought it was a bit too wide and it tended to almost shred some tips. So luckily this one is nice, smooth, not as wide as that one. So I think that was all very good. And again, color looks great. Inside the box, there's a couple things. You get a sheet there. We have a the QKZ case, which has the black QKZ cable. This one is the microphone cable, so if those of you who are interested in gaming or need a microphone, that is what the microphone cable looks like, so that is pretty cool. I don't get to see too many microphone cables, so it's kind of a little treat there. You also do get the HBB audio and QKZ collaborative commemorative coin, so another cool piece to have and another really nice touch to throw in the box of things that people would enjoy to see or be lucky to have at this price point. So I think goodies in the box. I think that was done quite well. All this, we'll kind of slide this out of the way. And again, I'm not going to go dig too much into the graph or the intention. I think Hawaii Bad Boy did a super job on talking about it. It's clearly a bass headset designed for bass head music, very heavy bass style music, R&B, rap, EDM, all of those are right in the sweet spot of this style tuning and the bass curve. Obviously it is targeted towards a very specific use case, so do take that under consideration. If you think it's like, well, my music doesn't have that much bass and I'm just kind of into it for some other reason other than this huge bass curve, then I would just say buy it for the bass curve, because that is pretty much what you're going to get. So we'll slide that out of the way and we'll kind of start right there. And as I said, the out-of-a-box experience, it is most definitely a bass headset and is most definitely a scary amount of bass. That is 15 decibels-ish. I don't know if it actually hit 15, but it is kind of way up there in bass level. So if you're used to, maybe 5 dB, 10 dB at your heavier bass sets, another 5 dB of bass is a lot of bass. And for me, I'm not really a low volume listener, so yeah, it's a shocking amount of bass if you're not used to it. If you are used to it, then you'll feel right at home with that amount of bass. But I typically, most of the sets that I tend to review end up in that 5 to 10 dB area. So 15 dB is just a way up there. And for those of you who kind of underestimate what it's like to have a really high level of sub bass plus mid bass, that's something that you don't see a whole lot in sets. You tend to see a lot of sub bass and then they drop this down really quickly so as to not color the mids as much as they kind of avoid doing it. But when you get this style where it's just a lot of sub bass and a lot of mid bass, that is going to be a lot of bass that affects pretty much all of your music, because they all hit in that area. So yeah, don't underestimate how much that is going to be. It is quite a lot. And again, if you're just into maybe test track style sub bass, you like to hear Why So Serious and hear that rumble in your ear, you're going to hear this rumbling and shaking your ear on pretty much every track, not just the test tracks. So as I said, I'm not a low volume listener, so it's just a lot of bass. So what does it sound like? And again, kind of going back to at the volume that I listen to, it sounds pretty much like riding in a car with subwoofers in the trunk listening to NWA or maybe Martin Garrix if you're into Animals or EDM. it's like walking into someone's car and they have the the EQ that has the bass slider, and the bass slider is at like 8 or 9. There's just a dominant amount of bass, as you would expect in a bass head style set. So yeah, I think that is the intention. That's exactly what it sounds like. I think that's it's about the closest thing that I could relate to. It just sounds like, walking into someone's car, they're playing their favorite tunes, the bass slider is way up there, and it's just booming and kind of shaking the car a little bit. That is the intention here, and I think it kind of did it right. But yeah, I'll call it bass head tilted done right. And this tilt is something that you don't notice as much in a car, but so big bass shelf, and then you kind of relax the treble out here and you don't make a super V out of it. So you can turn up the volume. This gets even more bassy. And again, as I said, I'm not a low volume listener, so this becomes a scary amount of bass, but you don't have a piercing, fatiguing, any kind of treble getting in the way. And that's what I call bass head tilted done right. So you can increase volume, you get more bass, but you don't have this rising too high, too fast, faster than the bass. I think the Fletcher Munson, kind of the way those move on this style tuning ends up being done quite right. So yeah, I think the tuning, as far as getting that bit right, I think it's kind of really, you can play it loud without the treble getting in the way. As I said, the treble needs to rise along with the bass, so you still have some clarity, but not take over to the point where it becomes fatiguing. Hades really hits that mark. So yeah, as far as execution of a bass head style signature, it is done like that, not a super V, big V, where you're going to have a lot of treble kind of getting in the way of you hearing and enjoying your bass. Why does that tuning style work? Because bass is the priority here. So rather than trying to boost the treble too much, kind of that's where Rosefinch, those of you who put a filter on Rosefinch nozzle, you sort of understand exactly what I'm talking about. That one has a little bit of brightness to it, and that brightness cuts into the bass. You don't have that here, and you end up with bass priority, bass head tilt. It's very much doesn't have that upper end to get in the way, to fatigue you, to sound like a V-shaped set. If you listen to Hades and Rosefinch kind of side by side, Rosefinch actually comes off a bit bright in that way. So just two different styles. I think some people tend to look at just this, right? They just look at the bass shelf, and Rosefinch has a similar looking bass shelf, and they forget that when you turn it up to volume, that you're going to have a treble hitting you at the same amount of time. And depending on what kind of music and what genres you listen to, that's kind of more noticeable, less noticeable. I noticed it on Rosefinch, and it's just a set that you can't turn up nearly as loud as you can on Hades for that simple reason. If you're a stage person, again, typical bass headsets, and Rosefinch sort of has this problem as well. They tend to be missing enough treble to push out the sides on the soundstage, so it sounds a little bit wide, it has some height to it, or they put kind of a Rosefinch problem where you have a little too much treble and it basically flattens it out. You end up with an overlapping mess. Hades creates enough space and leaving some air in the middle so it doesn't sound like a really dense block of bass. Easy to drive, but it really needs some volume to kind of hear that. But it really avoided that bit of it sounding so in your head, so overlapping, where there's no separation. You just had a big ball of bass in the middle of your head. It really avoided that and pushed everything out to the sides with just enough treble to the point where it does move it out, but it doesn't, become a fatiguing bit even at volume. So yeah, I think there's a couple really tiny details in the tuning that really work here in this style. And that was just kind of one of them that you sort of notice right off the bat that the stage is not quite the same as other bass headsets that you might have listened to. So bass, yes, no matter what you think, it will sound like 15 dB is a lot of bass. Don't try to avoid it in your music. Don't try to dance around, not go into your bass music. Just embrace it. That's where Hades sounds best. So fully going, if that's not your intention with buying Hades, yeah, don't avoid it. You have to be listening to really bass head style, or bass-centric music for it to sound at its best. And mids. Again, I think HBB actually touched on this, and if you're looking for a set that he called it touching the mids, anything that colors the mids, this one isn't for you. And I would say that is sort of one metric, and I tend to look at how clear the mids are. What's the execution in this style of bass head? with the intended music styles. And I think it really avoided most of the common problems, like being too muddy, pushing the mids too far back, sounding like it's in a tunnel, no dynamic range, no separation. It kind of got away from all the common problems that you've heard on other sets. And at the other end, there wasn't too much treble getting in the way of the bass, right? So sure, there's going to be some touching of the mids and some coloring of the mids, and they're not going to sound maybe as clear as they do on your variations. But again, in this style, with this execution, I think he got, you know, pretty much all the major common problems right. And if you want to go off the ranch and step outside of rap and R&B and EDM into other genres, you'll kind of quickly realize that most of the genres that you listen to in pop music have a ton of bass. Tori Amos' Crucify, it's just a lot of bass. At 15 dB, that is going to hit you in the head quite a few times. Go back and put Skrillex back on. Go back and put Tupac, NWA, Dr. Dre. Go back to those genres, because that sort of bass style works much better here, as opposed to trying to work on some other genres that don't quite fit, and it was never really intended to play back on those either. So the treble, again, this one is kind of deceptive. I think everyone will focus on the bass and why, but why does the treble work here? If you've heard a really dark, muddy bass headset or a Super V set that kind of has piercing and volume, you'll kind of dig this and sort of think about why this one works in this way. As I said, you hear it kind of right away in the stage, how the stage actually has some width to it and some height to it. And you'll hear that before you even figure out what's going on with the treble. And it's not a treble set, obviously, but when you listen to Madonna's Holiday, it doesn't sound too dark. It doesn't sound weighed down, like kind of a wet blanket over it, so veiled where it doesn't sound like Madonna. You know, it actually gets a lot of that right. And it goes back to this treble and where it kind of lines up with your volume level and on those tracks. And it works in a very deceptive way. And kind of have to think about what's going on there. But as I said, you'll hear it right away in the stage, and then you'll listen to some of your tracks and you're like, oh, that's actually very interesting the way it all played out that way. So it definitely has bass, but don't forget that the treble can still drive engagement on a bass headset like this one does. So stage, as I said, take notice as to why there is still space in the stage, why everything isn't overlapped and in a big ball and sounds so congested and non-dynamic, right? There's some really fine points that are all working here in its favor, and stage is one of them. So enjoy it, turn the knob to the right, turn on your bass head tracks, and you know, that is exactly where this one is most happy and where it will give you the most happiness. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.